Hi, and welcome to this PowerShell quick tip video. So we're going to be working with Active Directory still. Once again, this will be the last few videos before we actually dive into the PS Write HTML dashboard with Active Directory. I just wanted to do some of these videos just to get people used to some of the commandlets that we're going to be using in that dashboard. So today we're actually going to be taking a look at password policies in Active Directory and how we can actually see what password policy is applied on a user and see the different password policies that are on the domain itself as well. So let's go ahead and let's actually just get started here. So the first thing we're going to see is how do we get a password policy that's applied on a specific user? So let's actually go see if we actually even have one applied on our employee one user. So let's do a get AD user resultant password policy. And then in here, we can put in a parameter of identity. So we're just going to put in our username here, which is going to be employee one. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to put the server, and we're going to put the server as jacked. And actually what I'm going to do here is we are actually just going to put the username in a variable just to make it easier, and the server in a variable as well called domain. Let's just do that, and then we can actually just change that, and this way it just saves us from having to type it out all the time, and we can just have it in a variable. And also this way, once you take it into your own environment, you can actually really take this script and just change it into the different environments that you're bringing it into. So let's go ahead and let's see what this comes back as. We're going to see that this comes back as empty because it did not find any resultant password policy. And that's because right now on my Active Directory, I actually don't have a password policy other than the default domain password policy. So we can actually get that default domain password policy by using the get AD default domain password policy. And then if we actually just run that, we will actually get that default domain policy. So here we can actually see, if we just make this a little bit bigger, we can see that the complexity is enabled, which means that you need to have an uppercase, lowercase, or a number or a symbol. You need to have a lot of those. And I'll show you how you can actually find this in the actual GUI as well afterwards. But we can see the distinguished name. We can see that the lockout duration is going to be 30 minutes if you get locked out. But the lockout threshold is 0. So this will mean that it's not actually enabled. A user will not be able to be locked out. The maximum password age here is set to 42 days, and the minimum password age is set to 1 day. And we can see that the minimum password length is set to 7. So it has to have 7 characters. And it keeps track of 24 passwords in the history. So that usually means that you cannot use the same password that you used in the last 24 times. And then the reversible encryption enabled is actually set to false in the default domain password policy. So what we can actually do is we can actually create a password policy directly from PowerShell. We actually don't need to go into Active Directory to create one. Although it is useful sometimes to go into the GUI to see the different options that you have and maybe what some of the different parameters mean. So we're going to see it the 2 different ways here. So what we're going to first do is just actually load into our server and then bring up the password policy screen just so we can actually see the different fields here. So here is my Active Directory server. And we can actually just go into tools and we can open the Active Directory Administrative Center. I find that this is the best place to actually find it here. And if you don't know where it is, you can just go directly into your domain here. We have it called Jacked. And then you're going to come into your system container. And then in there, you will have something called password settings container. You can actually double click on this and we can actually see that we don't have anything in here because we don't have a custom password policy. But we can actually say new and a new password settings, and it will actually open up a screen where we can actually set up the different fields that we want for our password policy, which will have name, precedence, and we can see that these 2 are required fields. We can see that enforced minimum password length is 7. So by default, when you create a new password policy, it will always take from the default password policy. So that is a good place to always start. And then we can see here that we can have the complexity requirements here. We can store the password using reversible encryption. So again, this is very handy. As you can see, by default, it is set to unchecked. And this is actually recommended just for better security protection, because otherwise you can actually reverse the encryption on the password and figure out what the user's password is. And then we can see that the enforce minimum password age and the enforce maximum password age. And we can also see the lockout threshold here. Number of failed logon attempts allowed. We don't have that filled out, so that would be that 0 that we saw. And then we can see that the 30 minutes is the reset for that, but that doesn't really apply because we don't even lock out the accounts. And we can see who the password policy applies to. Now you can actually set this up to be groups, or you can set it up to be actual users as well. So let's just close out of this screen because we're actually going to be doing the entire thing through PowerShell. So let's actually go ahead and let's minimize this here. And let's go back into PowerShell and create our password policy. So what we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to do a new AD fine-grained password policy. And the first thing we're going to want to put is a name here because we know that that's required. So we're going to say test password policy. And then we want to set a precedent. So the precedence is, I believe, is the lowest. Always takes precedence here. So if we actually go here and we look at precedence, you will see that it is a required field. And if you hover over top of it, you will see that password settings with a lower precedence number will overwrite ones with higher ones. So basically what that means is if you have a password precedence of 1 or a 0, really, that will be your password policy pretty much applied to everyone if you put everyone under that password policy. So if you have 2 password policies, one was the number of precedence 5, and then one was the precedence of 1, and you assign both of those to a user, the one that will take precedence is the one that has the value of precedence 1. So whatever is the lowest precedence number of the password policy applied on the user, that will be the one that gets applied to the user in question. So that kind of explains the precedence here. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to put the precedence of 1 because we're just creating one. So this will, of course, depend very much on your environment. If you have different levels of employees that might need stricter password policies, you would actually want to create the strictest password policy with precedence 1, and then go ahead and put the lower ones as lower security. At least this way, if you assign someone the precedence 1 policy, you know that that will be applied because that is the most secure. That's the way that I would do it, of course. You can definitely not have it set by precedence and make sure to unassign people from the password policy and assign them to the correct one. It just kind of avoids any issues of maybe someone having a lesser strict password policy. So we'll have it set to a precedence of 1. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have the complexity enabled. We're going to set that to true. We want to have it them to force the complexity. And we will also set the minimum password length. We're going to want to set that up to be 12. And then what we also want is the lockout threshold. We want to set that to, let's say, 10. So if they try their password incorrectly 10 times, the user will be locked out. And based on our theory of it takes the default password policy as the base template, the lockout duration will be 30 minutes. Now, of course, you can set every value in here, and in a production environment, that might actually be the best option. And you can always go ahead and set these all through variables at the top here. So what we can actually do is if we had set it up to the password policy name, we can set this to our value here. And then we can have precedence. So you can do it all through variables, of course. That is something that we've seen before. But what you could also do is set up a hash table of values. So let's just do a password policy hash here. And we're going to make that equal to an @ symbol and curly brackets. We're going to put name. And we're going to put our name here. And we're going to see how this actually worked out. So test password policy. And the precedence is, so we don't want a $sign in front of that though. We're going to put that to 1. We're going to say complexity enabled. We're going to set that to true. And what we also wanted to do was the min password length and the lockout threshold. So what I usually do is I just copy these parameters, put them in the hash table like this. And this way I don't even have to really type them out. And then all you really have to do is you can erase all of your settings that were in the commandlet here. And we can put, I believe it is just the $sign password policy hash. And the only thing that we need to actually add here is going to be server. And we want that to be equal to the domain here. And we should be able to actually run this. And precedence is actually spelled incorrectly here. So let's just exit out and precedence. And let's run that again. Precedence, that should be good here. So I'm not too sure why that's not working. Let's do an @ symbol here, because sometimes that will actually affect with the hash tables. That is something that I often forget. So if you want to reference your hash table in a commandlet, you don't reference it by the $sign variable name, which is something that in PowerShell you're very used to calling a variable with a $sign. This is something that I still forget very, very often. When you're trying to reference a hash table to replace a parameter set, you actually use the @ symbol and then the variable name. As you can see, we didn't get any errors here. And we have set the name, the precedence, the complexity enabled, minimum password length, the lockout threshold. So let's go ahead, let's go into our server and let's see our password policy. So we're just going to refresh this screen. There is the test password policy, our precedence. And if we go in there, there is our minimum password length. We can see that the 24 has been checked off. Now, the one thing when you do create it with PowerShell, one thing that I've noticed is that the store password using reversible encryption is automatically checked, which that I don't really like. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to fix that. And then the protect from accidental deletion is unchecked. Now, it is always recommended to have it checked. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to actually check that as well. And as we can see, our enforce account lockout policy has worked. We can see our number 10 here, and it did keep the defaults of Birdie and Birdie. So that seems to have worked pretty well here. So let's go ahead and let's see what we can actually do here. So what we could do is we can actually, so now we can't create just a new password policy because we already have one. So what we can actually do is set AD fine-grained password policy. And once again, we just reference our password policy hash. And let's go ahead and let's just see what types of parameters that we need. So we're going to say protected from accidental deletion. We're going to want that. And we want the reversible encryption enabled. So let's go ahead. Let's take these two parameters. Like I said, like this is the way that I really like to do it, is just kind of get the parameters written correctly through the auto completion. It just protects from making the spelling mistakes like I did with precedence. So we want it protected from accidental deletion, and we do not want the reversible encryption. So let's go ahead and let's set that hash table in there. And then let's go ahead and let's update our password policy here. Let's do the set AD fine-grained password policy. It just seems to be a little frozen here, so we're just going to wait a little moment. And then parameter cannot be found on name. Okay, so that is because we cannot reference the name here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take this hash. We're going to make a new one here. And instead of name, we're going to change it to identity. Because instead of referencing by name with the set fine-grained policy, it is actually set by identity, I believe. That accepts a, oops, I had a accidental extra little dash there. So there it is. It has worked fine. So all we needed to do for the set AD fine-grained password policy, we needed to change the name to identity, and that's because we're not setting the name. We are just trying to find the AD fine-grained password policy that already exists and just update it. So there we have the identity as the test password policy. So now if we go back into our server here, we go ahead, we refresh this, and we open it up. We can see that now the reversible encryption is actually unchecked and the accidental deletion is checked. So now that we've created our password policy through Active Directory, what we actually need to do now is apply it to our users. Because if we go ahead and we just look at our employee one, we're going to see that we still get nothing. And if we get our default domain policy, we're going to see that is still very much the exact same. It hasn't changed because we haven't changed our default domain policy. We just created a new one. So what we actually need to do to add someone to our password policy is we need to do the add AD fine-grained password policy subject. And then in there, we're going to put in our identity. And then this is where we are going to put in our, so we can reference our hash. And we should be, oh, I can't reference it by name there. So what we're going to do is we're just going to type it out. So we're going to say it is our test password policy. And then the person that we want to apply it to is going to be deemed as subjects. Now, the easiest way that I find to do this is to actually wrap this in parentheses and do a get AD user identity employee one. And then we're going to make sure that we put in our server. So we're going to put in our server with our domain. And then we're just going to pipe that to select distinguished name. That should be spelled correctly. And if we go ahead and we run this here, we don't get any error messages. And now if we come back to the top here and get our get AD resultant password policy, we will see that we actually get our custom policy back. We can actually see that it is a minimum password of 12. We can see our lockout threshold, our reversible encryption. So it's already applied to the user. And you can even get this a slightly different way. If we actually wanted to see the details of the password policy and just the password policy, we can do a get AD fine-grained password policy and then the identity of test password policy. And we can go ahead and just run that there. And there it is. And we can actually even see in this one, there is an extra field called applies to, and we can actually see who it's applied to. So one of the other things that we can actually do is if we get the AD, so if we want to add a group, we would use the exact same command, but instead of get AD user, it would just be get AD group. And then the identity, we're going to say marketing, because I should have a group called marketing. We can actually just check that if we go like this. There it is. Marketing is in there. So if we go ahead and we run this, and then we get our find policy, we will see now that it is applied to the marketing group, which I believe the marketing group should have get AD group member. So we've seen this before. Identity is going to be marketing, and then the server is going to be domain. And we can see in here, there is a group. So if we actually do a recursive on this, we will see that actually both employees are in there. So now if I actually change this to employee 2, we should actually also get our test password policy for employee 2. So we can actually see that it is applied to both users. So my way of typically doing things would typically be applying it to a group and then managing that group automatically with scripts at nighttime when you're executing your user management scripts. This way you're avoiding applying the script directly to employees and more so to a group. So you never really have to touch that password policy. As soon as they hit, let's say you have all of your groups that are assigned by job titles. As soon as they get assigned to a new job title, their password policy automatically updates because now they are part of this new group. So they'll get their new password policy. And if you've also automated the removal from the other group, at least they will only have that one group. And if they are still part of, let's say they have 2 jobs, they then are in 2 different groups, they should have the one that's the most strict. So they'll be in the 2 groups. And once again, with the proper precedence set on the different password policies, that's why your strongest one should always be applied as number 1 or number 0. It will automatically take effect as the password policy on that user, and it will be the stricter one of the 2 that gets applied. So that is really Active Directory password policies with PowerShell. They are very, very easy to manage through PowerShell. You don't really need to go into the GUI interface unless you do want to just make sure that everything looks correct. That's what I would usually recommend is once you run it with PowerShell, especially at the beginning, always make sure that all the settings that you think you've applied have actually transferred over, and then save that script and then commit it to your GitHub or push it to your GitHub. And then this way, if for whatever reason you need to rebuild your Active Directory environment, you will have that password policy in code and you don't have to recreate it manually. Or if you need to bring up another environment, you easily have that password policy in code. So that is that video. If you have any questions regarding these password policies or any of the commandlets that we looked at today, please let me know in the comments section down below. If there's something that you would like me to look at specifically, or something that you would like me to include in the dashboard that we're going to be creating with PS Write HTML, please let me know in the comment section down below. And please be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, also hit that notification bell to be notified when that next video comes out, and I will see you guys on the next video.